Hey Fuggers, what's up? Today we're looking at some new cards revealed for Hearthstone, but before we get into that, if you want to be a Fugger, subscribe to my channel down below, and while you're down there, drop a like and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date on all my new content which I release every week. It's absolutely free and painless to subscribe, and you can always unsubscribe later, so please, every single one of your subscriptions counts. Anyway, let's get into some reviews.
What's up, Fuggers?
Alright, our first card here is Halveria Darkraven. Now this card might be one that a lot of you have already seen because this did get revealed on Friday. I missed the reveal on Friday because I was busy this weekend, so I wasn't able to put out a video. So with this video, I'm just going to go ahead and review all of the cards that were revealed on Friday and the cards that were revealed today. So we're going to just push through these and hopefully we can get through these pretty quickly. Alright, so Halveria Darkraven is a 4-mana 4/3 with Rush that says after a friendly Rush minion attacks, give your minions +1 attack. So this importantly does not say after another Rush minion attacks, it says after a friendly Rush minion attacks, which means that this is also proccing itself. So this will buff your whole board when it attacks. That means at minimum in a token Demon Hunter deck, this is a board buff of +1 as long as there's an enemy minion to attack into, and if you can remove like a taunt while doing it, that's really powerful. In addition, if you have any 1/1s from the spells that summon a bunch of 1/1s with Rush that Demon Hunter has so many of, lying around, still sitting on board after a turn, you can use those to buff your board even further. Overall, a card like this looks very promising to me in some sort of token Druid deck, and this seems very possible to be a deck. This card is exactly the kind of support that makes stuff like that work, so I'd definitely be keeping an eye on this one. Now, one unfortunate thing for a deck like this in Standard is that Field of Strife is rotating, and that would have been a really good enabler for a deck like this. I do think this card is stronger significantly because it comes with a 4/3 body that has Rush, but I do think Field of Strife would have made the deck a lot stronger. Now that said, in Wild, they will both exist, so it is possible that some sort of token Demon Hunter exists because of these cards. Wild is a lot more fast-paced, so I wouldn't count on it. It's entirely possible that it's just not good enough, but it's something to think about at least. Another card that's really good with the last card is Rush the Stage, the new 3-mana Demon Hunter spell that says draw 2 Rush minions, they cost 1 less. So not only is this potentially drawing you Halveria, it also draws you other Rush minions as fodder for Halveria to buff your board further, so I think this has some serious potential here. It's also important to note that this just draws Rush minions, so this will probably see play in all kinds of Demon Hunter decks, because there's always good Rush minions in the meta. There's going to be something that you're running with Rush, so this is just going to be good. For example, during the Skullomance Academy expansion, this would have absolutely seen play to tutor your broomsticks. I feel like a card like this just promises success every time, so this is definitely going to see play, especially because when you do the math, this comes out to be a 1-mana draw 2, which is incredibly powerful. Obviously, the more expensive your Rush minions get, the less you'll feel that being a 1-mana draw 2, but if you're drawing 2 1-mana Rush minions, this really feels cheap. Alright, next up here we have Snakebite, another Rush minion for Demon Hunter, so this is going to synergize really nicely with the last 2 cards. And this is a 2-mana 1/1 Naga with Rush. This is Battlecry, gain +1/+1 for each minion that died this turn. Now, it's important to note that this says for each minion that died this turn, not for each friendly minion. So that means if you play something like Command the Eladari to summon a bunch of 1/1s with Rush, or maybe 2/1s if you've played Field of Strife prior, then you're going to be able to take out your opponent's board and get +1/+1 not only for each of those 1/1s that dies, but for each of your opponent's minions you're able to destroy as well. Overall, this seems like a very powerful tool for Demon Hunter for me, especially because it's coming down with Rush, so it's able to take a trade immediately. It's going to be insane. Next up here for Demon Hunter, we have Security. A 2-mana spell that says summon 2 1/1 Illidari with Rush, outcast, summon 1 more. So this is a really cool card for Demon Hunter, not only because it's summoning Rush minions that synergize with the rest of this package, but also because it's a new outcast card that's reactive, which is really valuable because of the amount of generation of outcast cards that Demon Hunter does. It's like the only type of card they seem to generate. So having valuable outcast cards to generate is always really good, and this is definitely above the curve for a 2-mana card as long as you're outcasting it. Now, we've obviously seen plenty of cards in Demon Hunter that synergize with having a lot of Rush tokens, things like Field of Strife and Feast of Souls that can really capitalize on these cards, so I don't think this will have a problem seeing play. This is also notably not a minion, so this is also able to slot into those big Demon Hunter decks that we've seen them try at again and again. Now, admittedly, those big decks have never really seen much success. The closest they've gotten is that Korea Felsoul saw mainstream success in a meta deck because she was able to cheat out Z-Log 1 turn early, eventually leading to her nerf. Now, this wasn't really a big deck seeing success, this was just the fact that it was playable outside of big decks because of the Colossal being so strong. So I'm not sure if there's much hope for a big deck here. We haven't seen any new support that's really that promising, but you never know. In a smaller meta with less cards, it's possible that something happens. We have seen some support for the deck in the past year, so it's possible that that support was enough and we just haven't seen the effects of that yet because of the amount of cards in Standard. In Wild, obviously, as always, the big deck is going to be too slow until they can start cheating stuff out as early as something like Big Priest. This is the reason that decks like Big Rogue, Big Priest, and Big Shaman are the predominant big decks in Wild, is because they are able to cheat stuff onto the board as early as like turn 3. Something like Demon Hunter just isn't able to compete in that arena. Alright, our next card here is a bit of an interesting one, Funkfin. It's a 3-mana 2/2 Murloc for Paladin. And this one says, Divine Shield. Your other minions with Divine Shield have +2 attack. Now, what's interesting about this is that, first of all, it's essentially a war leader for Divine Shield minions, which is really powerful. But second of all, most minions like this actually exclude themselves from their aura effect when they're affecting the whole board, but this minion notably does not. This is actually becoming a 4/2 while it has Divine Shield. This, in my opinion, makes it one of the most powerful board buffing aura minions we've ever seen outside of, I believe, Horse Rider. Horse Rider is just insane with its ability to give minions taunt in front of it, so it just builds a wall against itself and makes it really hard for board-based decks to deal with, so that's a little bit stronger in my opinion. But this is definitely really close, and Divine Shields are definitely not hard to get in Paladin. Another thing that not a lot of people realize is that there's a weapon that gives your whole board Divine Shield. I can't remember the name of it, something Seed Buckler, I think. But that card was really good with Murloc Paladin, where you use Prismatic Lens to cheat out Tip the Scales. A lot of people didn't realize this. I was playing the deck at the time, though, and that weapon would give your entire board Divine Shield, making it immune to most board clears that aren't just hard removal like Twisting Nether. This just gave you a really resilient board and made it so you were pretty certain to have the victory locked down. A card like this would make a perfect addition to something like that, so it's definitely something to keep an eye out for. And that weapon is just usable outside of that, so maybe in some sort of deck you just play that weapon, give your board Divine Shield, and give it a bunch of attack with this guy. Now that is a wild weapon now, so that would be a wild combo, and there are other ways to give your board Divine Shield in wild. I don't know how good this guy is going to be in most of those decks, because the best way right now, as far as I know, is Bubblebot. Now, this is also true in Standard, that Bubblebot is the main way to give your board Divine Shield, but I do believe that this guy is going to be good enough for that deck in Standard. In Wild, you're just going to want to be playing mechs, but in Standard, you can afford this guy. There is also some other strategies for getting Divine Shields in Paladin, like the Scale Lord? I believe his name is Scale Lord. It's a dragon that gives all of your Murlocs Divine Shield. That would also be really powerful for this. There is also, of course, the Dude Paladin deck where you can play Lothraxion. This card works perfectly in that. And, on that note, this card is also Odd. I do believe this sees play in Odd Paladin because of Lothraxion. You have the ability to give your boards of Divine Shield +2 attack. It's really powerful. With this, you might need to include the Buckler to try and get some more consistency on your Divine Shield boards, but I do think that it's going to be strong. Alright, our next card up here is Jitterbug. It's a 4-mana 4/3 beast for Paladin. It has Divine Shield and says after a friendly character loses Divine Shield, draw a card. So this is going to be the draw engine for that Divine Shield deck that it looks like they're pushing with this set for Paladin. And it's looking pretty strong. It says after a friendly character loses Divine Shield, so that is also going to work with the legendary spell that gives your hero Divine Shield. So when you're attacking with a weapon and losing that Divine Shield, you are going to be getting a card with this card up. So this just looks pretty insane for decks that are looking to build Divine Shields. Like I said with the last one, it's probably going to be in a Mech Paladin deck post-rotation, because there's just going to be a limited number of cards, so you're going to be playing cards that aren't necessarily mechs in the deck to try and empower it, and this looks to be one of those cards, because after you play a Bubblebot, you often are taking a lot of trades into the opponent's board, and with this, you can turn that into value in hand. So you should be able to last a lot longer in games and make a lot more boards, putting out a lot better of pressure, and just being able to close out games better. Overall, I do think this is a very good card in a variety of decks. I think that there will be a Divine Shield deck, and this will be part of that, but I also think it fits into other decks that have Divine Shields and want to capitalize on them. Lastly, here we have another card for Paladin that's trying to capitalize on your Divine Shields, Spotlight, a new tradable spell for Paladin that is 2 mana that says, convert a friendly Divine Shield into a 5/5 elemental. This card is really powerful for decks that are trying to play Knight of Anointment because you can always have a target for him to draw because you can trade this into the deck and then have him search it out. So I definitely think it's really powerful for that reason, but also it's a 2-mana 5/5, which is just really strong in its own right. There's actually a 2-mana 5/5 that sees play right now in Priest occasionally, Incorporeal Corporal. Now that card gets destroyed after the first time it attacks, so it's a lot less useful than this. This is just a 2-mana 5/5 with no drawbacks other than taking off a Divine Shield. Now obviously a lot of the time, taking off a Divine Shield isn't going to be worth it to create a 5/5 because you have a really good trade on board or something like that, and you really don't want to get rid of that Divine Shield. But sometimes you have a scenario where you're playing a buff spell that gives your minion Divine Shield that already has Divine Shield, so you can play this in between, get a 5/5, then give them that Divine Shield again for that extra value. There's also the fact that if you play this on curve, it's just devastating in any kind of matchup where tempo matters. So if your opponent can't remove this and you're doing 5 damage to their face at least once, this is doing a lot. And it is very possible with cards like Click Clocker and Righteous Protector to be able to play this on curve onto that card after the opponent is not able to pop that Divine Shield with their play, and that's just going to be insane. Alright, next up here we have the last of the cards that were revealed on Friday. Infinitize the Maxitude. It's 2 mana, and it's the legendary spell for Mage. It's discover a spell, finale, return this to your hand at the end of the turn. So this spell is theoretically infinite value as long as you're able to activate that finale every time. Now, obviously, you're not going to be able to every single time, but you don't have to play it every turn, so you can only play it when you're able to get that finale. But once you reach like a late game fatigue stage, I do think you're going to have a problem getting infinite value out of this card, so I don't think it's infinite, like in the literal sense, like a lot of people seem to be saying, but it is a relatively infinite, and it's infinite enough for how long card games seem to go in Hearthstone these days, so I do think it's pretty good value. That said, in a game where you're reaching like turn 9 to like 13 in an average game, if you're playing a control deck, spending 2 mana to discover a spell with no added benefit other than getting back your 2 mana discover a spell is kind of underwhelming. Now, it is like a hero power, it's the same cost as a hero power, but I just don't think it's that good. You do get to discover a spell, but you have to finale it for it to come back, so I don't know if this is going to get there, but maybe it is good. Another thing to note, though, is that this is a 2 mana spell, so you will be able to get this from other means, like, for example, off of School Teacher. So overall, I do think it will pop up in the meta, I just don't know if it will be in any decks, but we'll have to wait and see on that. There is one other thing to note, and that is that this synergizes with Rawmith, so if there is a Rawmith deck, there's a very good chance this just slots into that anyway, so that could be one avenue for it. Alright, next up to start off the cards that were revealed today, we have Free Spirit, a new undead beast for Druid that says, Battle Cry and Death Rattle, your hero power gains 1 more armor this game. Now this card is absolutely ridiculous, and it also synergizes really nicely with Oracle of Elune, which copies a friendly minion that you play that costs 2 or less. So you're going to get an extra Death Rattle from this whenever you copy it, so that's going to be pretty insane with cards like that. This does say this game, which leads me to believe that even if you change your hero power, this is going to keep happening. So that means if you play something like Malfurion, you're still going to gain more armor when you pick the armor side of that. So that's going to be really powerful, I think. It's also 1 mana, which just makes it really flexible and easy to fit into turns, so I think that you'll have no trouble playing this in any sort of deck that can play 1-drops. Obviously, you wouldn't play this in an Oaken Summons deck, so that is one restriction for the card, but I do think it looks really strong. I also think this is deceptively strong for aggro decks, because this is going to help strengthen your hero power when you're not able to play cards and you're running out of gas and all you have left is that hero power. Now obviously this one is only increasing the armor gain for that, but that will help you last a little bit longer to try to keep going face against your opponent. There is also another one of these undead beasts, though, that we will talk about next. Alright, next up here we have Groovy Cat, a 2-mana 2/1 for Druid. It's a beast, so I guess it's not an undead beast. This one's just a beast. That's my bad. But Groovy Cat has Battle Cry and Death Rattle. Your hero power gives your hero 1 more attack this game. So what this is going to do is allow you to just have a lot more damage output in the late game after you've played these. Overall, you're getting up to 5 attack on your hero power, which is insane. Now, these are odd and even costed, so you can't play both of them in a Baku or Gen deck, which is unfortunate. I would really love if this was an odd cost card, because odd at Questline Druid is really powerful. Even Druid is also really strong because of cards like Park Panther and that 2-mana 1/4 that gains attack every time your hero gains attack, so I do think that this is going to be a strong addition to that deck. I also think this is just strong in general, and again, like the last one, I do think it has applications in aggro Druid. Now, I do think it's a little bit less useful in that aspect because it's a 2/1 rather than a 1-mana 1/2, so it's understated, and It's pretty badly understated. So it's kind of weak, but it is a really powerful effect to gain attack on your hero power every single time you hero power, so I do think it has a chance of seeing play, because that 2 mana that you spend on your hero power every turn you don't have anything else to do is going to become more impactful after playing this. So I do think that might matter a lot more than you might initially think, and you might be considering this for your aggro decks. It also goes without saying that both of these cards are really good for a questline deck, even if that questline deck is not odd. Although the first one is good for the odd questline deck as well, theoretically, although that deck doesn't really play minions. So I don't know if you would change around the deck just to include that card. I don't really think you would, but theoretically, it could be good in a version of the deck if that ever becomes better than the version that exists now. Next up here, we have another card that is really strong in the questline deck, but also just really strong in general, and that is Spread the Word. This is a 4-mana spell for Druid called Spread the Word that says draw 2 cards. Costs 1 less for each attack your hero has. So this is really similar to a lot of cards that they've been printing recently that are 4 mana, draw 2, and then get discounted by some sort of effect. So this is nothing really new, but it is very powerful with this condition attached to it for each attack your hero has, because that's a really easy condition to meet. And you'll notice it doesn't say that it costs a minimum of 1, it says that it costs 1 less for each attack your hero has. So that means that this gets to 0 as soon as you have 4 attack. I think that's going to be really easy to achieve, and I think this is going to be a really powerful card. For example, in Even Druid, you can play Park Panther and Hero Power, and this is 0 mana. That seems pretty strong, and that's achievable by turn 5 or 4 with the coin. Outside of that, there's also a lot of really easy ways to boost your attack. For example, Rake boosts your attack by 2 for 1 mana, as does Claw. You also have Pounce for 0 mana, giving you 2 attack. So theoretically, for 0 mana, you can get up to 4 attack and draw 4 cards. That seems pretty insane. I just think this is going to be a really strong card, and also notably, Pounce does see play in Gadgetzan decks, and you will be able to play this for 0 mana in those decks. I don't know if you play it because it's a lot of draw to draw 2 cards and the card from Gadgetzan, but you might be playing this anyway. I just think this card has a lot of angles that it works at, and it's just a really powerful draw tool. Cards like this tend to be really strong and make decks want to build around them because of how flexible they can be. So it just makes a lot of sense to just add some attack cards to a deck so you can enable this. So I do think it will see a lot of play. Alright, next up here we have Zok Fogsnout, a 7-mana 6/6 Quillbore. Zok has a battle cry, summon 2 1/1 Quillbore with Taunt, improved by your hero attack and armor gained this turn. Now, I believe how this works is that the 2 1/1 Quillbores with Taunt have their stats raised for the attack and armor gained, so your attack raises the attack of the Quillbore and your armor raises the health of the Quillbore. I haven't been able to find confirmation exactly that that's how this works, but I believe that would make the most sense. So this seems like a really powerful card with the recent cards revealed. Being able to get up to 5 attack with just your 2 mana hero power is really strong with this. There's also the fact that you can play cheap attack improving cards like Pounce or Rake or Claw to be able to gain a little bit more attack. So you can gain a little bit more attack and or armor to boost this card just that much more. Overall, this guy looks pretty powerful to me. If you have 5 attack and 5 armor on your hero power, it is summoning you 2 6/6s, which is pretty strong. So I do think that this is a very viable card. 3 6/6s is a pretty strong play for 7 mana, with 2 of them having taunt. It's not game winning or anything, so it is kind of slow at 7 mana, but Druid does have ramp. So you were playing this earlier than most decks are playing 7 mana cards. So I do believe this has an opportunity to be playable. I do think that this does not have any opportunity in those aggro decks that will be playing those cards, though, because this is obviously far too slow for any sort of token deck to consider. It's 7 mana, it's just too much of a mana commitment. And if you draw it early, you're just bricking your hand, so you really just don't want to run cards like this. But in some sort of ramp deck, I could definitely see it. Next up here we have Harmonic Hip-Hop. Now there was not a card for the swapped version of this, but you can just imagine it. This deals 1 damage and gives your weapon 3 attack, and then it swaps to 3 damage, 1 attack. Now, this seems like a really powerful card. It's also Shadow, if that matters. I don't know if that really does matter in Rogue right now, but eventually it might. But this is a really powerful weapon buff, and I do think that this is going to see significant play because you can play this on Kingsbane, for instance, which I do believe will see a resurgence with some of the cards we have in this expansion. And this is one of those cards that I think is definitely going to empower that deck to come back. This is just a really strong buff, and I believe Nitro Boost Poison is very strong when it's corrupted, but because it's kind of hard to corrupt it in a deck like that, it doesn't see much play, because the corrupted half is the one giving you +3 attack. If the first half was giving you +3 attack on your weapon, then you would definitely be playing that card. I think deal 1 damage is often somewhat good. It's usually kind of irrelevant, but it is a something. The +3 attack on your weapon, though, is incredible. For 2 mana, that's just a really strong value, and I do think it's very good. I also think the flexibility this affords you of being able to deal 3 for 2 and get +1 attack on your weapon is really valuable for reactivity, because that deck currently lacks a lot of it, as it has dropped cards like Backstab in favor of more weapon buffs like Silverleaf Poison and Paralytic Poison to just make your weapon more effective. This also makes Flurry a lot more powerful. Anything that raises your attack by a significant amount does this, because you will be able to get a board clear much sooner in the game from your Blade Flurries. Overall, I think this is a really good card. I also think this is good on other cards and in other decks, because if you're buffing any sort of weapon with this, it seems like it's probably worth it. The extra ping on top of it just makes it a really neat bundle, and it makes it just a valuable card to have in the Rogue arsenal, so I do think this sees significant play. Next up here we have Mic Drop, another card that I believe will be empowering the Kingsbane deck. And that is a 3 mana draw 2 cards with Finale, give your weapon +2 attack. Now this card is absolutely insane in my opinion. You do need to have your weapon up, but if this is the last card you play, or at least you spend all of your mana to play it, you will be getting +2 attack on your weapon in addition to those 2 cards. That's a lot of value for 3 mana, and you can also prep this out, so it should be really powerful. In addition, card draw is one of those things that Kingsbane can sometimes struggle with. Now, people might be confused when I say this, because Rogue has some of the best card draw in the game by far, but Kingsbane needs a lot of card draw to stay consistent, because they need to draw that one very specific card in their deck. Now, you do play a lot of tutors for it, so you can draw any of those as well, but the point is you really need to hit those cards. This is going to really help the deck with that, because not only is this card draw, but it is bundled with a buff to your weapon, so it makes it a lot easier to play a card like this and slot it in. Overall, I think this is really good for the Kingsbane deck, and I think it might be really good outside of that as well, although I don't think it's nearly as good outside of that environment, because 3 mana, draw 2, untargeted isn't that great in Rogue. Alright, our next card here is MC Blingtron, a 5 mana mech for Rogue. It's a 3/4. This is the same stat line and mana cost as the old Blingtron, only this time, Blingtron is giving both players microphones. These are 1/2 weapons. You get a microphone and your opponent gets a broken microphone, which increases all damage they take by 1. So this is a really insane effect, but it is very limited in certain aspects because they can break that weapon to remove that effect. So ideally, you're going to want to take advantage of that immediately. And I don't know how many cards you have that can actually do this effectively. Now, this is a pretty good combo with Astalor, but in Priest, there's a 1 mana minion that already does this, and since Astalor is a neutral minion, I feel like that would just be an easier way to achieve this combo. So I'm not sure how actually good this minion is. Now, Rogue does have access to bounce effects, so they can pull this back to their hand and keep reusing it. And it does increase the damage that your board does by 1, so maybe in some sort of tempo deck, this is just really good. And of course, there will be times where your opponent can't actually stop you because they can't remove that weapon immediately and they have to swing 2 turns in a row to get rid of it. So I do think it has avenues for success. I just worry about the times where the opponent just immediately equips a weapon to break it and just stops you from doing whatever you were planning on. Now, there is that 3 mana mech for Rogue that deals 4 damage randomly split among enemies. That would do 8 damage if it was hitting face with this. That seems like something to seriously consider. I do think because Shadow Step is still in the core set that this card has some possibilities with that 3 mana minion that deals 4. So I do think that's something to look out for. Other than that though, I don't think this seems that good. But we'll have to wait and see. Alright, next up here for Hunter, we have our first card, and a big beast for Hunter. It seems that the archetype of big beasts is getting more support, and to start things off we have Mr. Mukla, a 6 mana 10/10 beast with Rush, and Battlecry, fill your opponent's hand with bananas. So this card seems incredibly useful. It's a large Rush minion that can immediately take a trade, and it also denies your opponent a card draw guaranteed. Now obviously the less cards they have in their hand, the less bananas you're giving them, which can be useful, but also, against certain classes, those bananas can be a huge drawback if they have nothing in hand but spells, because those bananas might only be playable on your minions, which means that they're going to have to dump them out by buffing your minions to make room in their hand. On occasion, that will happen, and it will be hilarious when it does. This also serves as a good backup plan for decks that are trying to cheat out big beasts, because this guy is 6 mana, so he doesn't necessarily have to be cheated out. You can just pay 6 mana for him and play him for his vanilla cost. Overall, I think he looks really strong, and I think that Big Beast Hunter is still looking like a good deck after rotation. Next up here, we have another minion meant to synergize with Mukla and other big beasts. Banjosaur, a 10 mana 5/6 beast. It has Rush, and whenever this attacks, draw a beast and gain its stats. So this minion is really powerful, and it does this whenever it attacks, so that means that if this attacks into a minion and dies, it's still going to draw a beast and gain those stats. As we've seen in the past with cards with effects like this, if this draws a big enough beast, it should be able to bring itself back above 0 health and survive the attack. I think this card is going to make for some insane moments, and I think it's going to be really strong. Now, I do think 10 mana is a lot of mana to spend on this card, so it will probably have to be cheated out. but I don't think Hunter's going to have any problems doing that. I also think in Wild, this is a really strong card. Wild Beast Hunter sometimes suffers from a lack of consistency, so having another really good rush minion in there that gains a lot of stats should be really good. And adding a bunch of beasts to your hand isn't necessarily a bad thing because you have Beastmaster Leorox to cheat those out of your hand. Overall, I think Banjosaur is going to be a really nice addition to big beast lists, and I think it's going to see a bunch of play. But I do think it's limited to only those decks because of its high cost. It will not be seeing play in other decks. Next up here, we have some more big beast support, although this seems pretty slow, so I don't know how good it is. It's a 5-mana spell for Hunter that says summon the highest cost beast from your hand. It goes dormant for 2 turns. Now, if it was dormant for 1 turn, I'd say, okay, this is pretty good. But dormant for 2 turns is quite a while to wait for your big beast. And 5 mana is a pretty huge commitment to do nothing for. I just think it's going to be a struggle for this to feel like that good of a card. Now, I do think that big beasts are going to be a deck currently because of cards like Ashar and Saber. So I do think that this might just slot into that deck because it's supporting the game plan, even if it's a little weak. So it's probably going to still be played in the deck. I just think that it's a little bit underwhelming for what you really want to be doing. I think that this card would be fine if it just came out 1 turn earlier, but at 5 mana it just seems kind of slow. Maybe I'm wrong though, we'll have to see. But right now, I'm thinking that this is kind of an underwhelming card in the deck. I do think the deck is going to be a strong deck, though. The next card here, I think, is an incredibly strong card, and not just for the Big Beast deck. Now, I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember Spiteful Summoner from Knights of the Frozen Throne, but that card is pretty insane with this. Having a tradable 10-mana spell in Hunter makes it a lot better of a card, because before you could sometimes draw out all of your spells and your Spiteful Summoners would do nothing. Now you can put this back into your deck before you play your Spiteful Summoner, so you summon a 10-drop every time. Now, if anyone is a little bit skeptical of what I'm saying right now because they haven't seen a Spiteful Hunter in a long time or ever, that's because it's just an unpopular deck. Spiteful Hunter has actually been a pretty good deck for the past few expansions. Actually, probably the past while, it's been at least tier 2. But people just don't play it because a lot of people just don't realize how good it can be with the right cards. This card is a very powerful addition to that deck, but it is also a very powerful addition to the Big Beast decks. So overall, I think this is going to be very strong. Another important thing to note is that this is resurrecting only beasts that cost 5 or more, which means you can play this in a deck where you play 1-drop beasts and stuff, and this is only going to give you those important, valuable beasts. So I do think this has avenues outside of big beasts, but it is 10 mana, which makes it a little bit prohibitive to play. That tradable makes it a lot more comfortable to slot into a deck, though, so I do think it's a possibility. Alright, our last card here is one that I seem to have missed on my last review. It's a 4-mana weapon for Hunter, Jungle Jammer. It has Death Rattle, summon a random 1-cost beast, cast spells while equipped to improve. So this is supposed to synergize with that Barrel of Monkeys and that Bunch of Bananas, those kinds of spells. And I do think this seems really good. It improves the cost of the beast, so you keep pumping up the cost. Eventually you get to like a 9-cost beast and hopefully summon King Crush, I guess is the idea. Overall, I kind of like this because getting a big beast is really valuable with this, and it is a 4-mana 4/2 weapon, so it's a pretty good weapon outright. So I think it's just worth playing. Overall, I think this is a pretty strong inclusion to some kind of mid-range Hunter deck, and I do think that they could appreciate the reach that's afforded by a 4/2 weapon, so I think it will see play. Alright, well that's going to wrap up the individual reviews, now on to star ratings. Halveria Darkraven is a 4-star card in Standard and Wild. Rush the Stage is a 4-star card in Standard and a 3-star card in Wild. Snakebite is a 5-star card in Standard and a 4-star card in Wild. Security is a 4-star card in Standard and a 3-star card in Wild. Funkfin is a 5-star card in Standard and a 4-star card in Wild. Jitterbug is a 5-star card in Standard and a 3-star card in Wild. Spotlight is a 5-star card in both Standard and Wild. Infinitize the Maxitude is a 3-star card in Standard and a 2-star card in Wild. Free Spirit is a 5-star card in Standard and a 4-star card in Wild. Groovy Cat is a 5-star card in both Standard and Wild. Spread the Word is a 5-star card in Standard and a 4-star card in Wild. Zok Fogsnout is a 4-star card in Standard and a 3-star card in Wild. Harmonic Hip-Hop is a 4-star card in Standard and Wild. Mic Drop is a 3-star card in Standard and Wild. MC Blingtron is a 3-star card in Standard and a 2-star card in Wild. Mr. Mukla is a 5-star card in Standard and a 4-star card in Wild. Banjosaur is a 4-star card in Standard and a 3-star card in Wild. Big Dreams is a 3-star card in Standard and a 2-star card in Wild. This may surprise people because it costs 10, but because of that tradable, I do believe Stranglethorn Heart is a 5-star card in both Standard and Wild. And Jungle Jammer is a 5-star card in Standard and a 2-star card in Wild. Well, there you go, guys. That wraps up my review. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, remember to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date on all my new content, which I release every week. That's going to do it for today. Thank you guys for watching. Stay safe. Peace.